In the village of Nayana, where the river ran deep and the hills stood like ancient guardians, lived a young girl named Zay. She was no ordinary child. Her life had been marked by loss and hardship. Her parents had passed away when she was only 6, leaving her in the care of her uncle, Jabari, a man with a heart as cold as the night wind. Jabari had once been a respected hunter, but time and bitterness had hardened him. He had no patience for children, especially not for a girl like Zay, who reminded him of the sister he had lost. He made her wake before the sun to fetch water from the river. He gave her the smallest portions of food at mealtime, always claiming she had not worked hard enough to deserve more. While other children played under the shade of the great baobab tree, Zoe spent her days washing clothes, mending torn baskets, and scrubbing the dirt floors of her uncle's hut. At night, she cried into her thin blanket, whispering to the moon, "When will I be free?" Zoe longed for the day she would no longer be seen as a weak little girl. She envied the grown women who walked with pride, whose voices were respected, who did not live under another's rule. One evening, after Jabari beat her for dropping a clay pot, she made a decision. "I will no longer wait," she whispered to herself. "I will find a way to grow up now." And so, she set off into the dark forest, searching for the one who could change her fate, the old woman who wove time. The forest was thick with shadows. Trees loomed over her like silent judges, and the wind carried whispers that made her shiver. But Zoe did not turn back. She had heard of the weaver, the old woman who could twist the threads of time. Some said she was a spirit, others claimed she was a forgotten goddess. Zoe followed the fireflies that danced in the dark, and after what felt like hours, she reached a small hut, its roof covered in moss. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of burning herbs and something ancient. A voice, both gentle and powerful, called from inside. "Come in, child. I have been expecting you." Zoe stepped inside and gasped. The room was filled with glowing threads, each one stretching into the unknown. The old woman sat before a great loom, her hands moving with impossible grace, weaving the threads of fate. Her eyes held the weight of centuries, and her face, though aged, was neither cruel nor kind. "Why have you come?" she asked, her voice like the rustling of leaves. "I want to grow up," Zoe said, her voice firm but desperate. "I want to be an adult now." The weaver sighed, touching a thread that shimmered like the moon. "Every season has its time," she said. "A flower that blooms too soon will wither before its time. Are you sure this is what you wish for?" Zoe clenched her fist. "I have suffered enough. I want my own life." For a long moment, the weaver studied her. Then, slowly, she reached for the golden thread of Zoe's fate and began to weave. The room filled with a warm, golden light. Zoe felt her bones stretch, her limbs lengthen, and her heart beat with a new rhythm. When the light faded, she looked down at her hands. She was no longer a child. At first, Zoe was intoxicated by her new form. She marveled at her long, graceful limbs, the strength in her arms, the command in her voice. Her childish braids had become thick, flowing locks, and her body felt powerful, free. She ran through the village, her heart soaring. No one would dare call her a child now. She found a group of women gathering firewood and approached them. "May I help?" she asked, standing tall. One of them, a woman named Ao, smiled and handed her a bundle. "You are new here?" "Yes," Zoe lied. "I am looking for work." Ao nodded. "We could use another pair of hands." For the first time in her life, Zoe was treated as an equal. She laughed with the women, ate her fill, and at night, she stretched out under the stars, feeling independent, free, and strong. She had never been happier. But the joy did not last. After a few days, Zoe realized that adulthood was not just freedom, it was responsibility. The woman expected her to walk from dawn until nightfall, carrying loads heavier than she had ever lifted. When her muscles ached, no one pitied her. One evening, her stomach growled with hunger, but there was no one to offer her food. She had to find her own. She wandered the marketplace, where traders bartered and haggled. But she had nothing to trade, no skills, no home. She tried to find work, but she knew nothing of cooking, weaving, or farming. People turned her away, saying, "We need experienced hands, not someone who just became a woman overnight." She had traded one kind of suffering for another. The loneliness was worse than anything. At least, in childhood, she had known her place. Now, she was adrift, with no past, no future, only the weight of days pressing down on her. One cold night, as hunger gnawed at her belly, she whispered, "I was not ready." Tears streamed down her face as she ran back to the forest, back to the weaver's hut. The old woman stood outside, waiting. Zeri fell to her knees. "I was wrong. I was not ready. Please, undo this, let me be a child again." The weaver's eyes were filled with sorrow. "My child," she said softly, "I can weave time forward, but never backward. What is done cannot be undone." Zeri collapsed in sobs, realizing the truth. She had stolen time from herself, and now it was lost forever. With no choice but to move forward, she rose to her feet and walked into the life she had rushed into, carrying the weight of her decision. This story teaches us that everything in life has its time, and rushing through it leads only to regret. Childhood is meant for learning, youth for growing, and adulthood for responsibility. When we try to force life to move faster than it should, we may find ourselves unprepared for what comes next. Patience is wisdom, and wisdom is knowing that every moment has its purpose.